First, let me congratulate you and thank you for getting up this morning and getting here. And I'm looking across the room and I see some of those people that were partying last night, but you managed to get here. Give yourselves a big round of applause. Thank you. And I want my panelists to note that we have a lot of young people in the room this morning. Isn't that wonderful? Thank you so very much. So I want to welcome you all to this important discussion on the intersection of black business, black banks, and access to credit for our community. This is a critical time to focus on black wealth and wealth building opportunities. The racial wealth gap has roots as old as the founding of this nation. Black families were intentionally shut out of wealth building opportunities by our own American government. Even after Congress passed laws to end redlining, discrimination in lending, and other practices, our communities were still targeted for unsavory, immoral, and borderline illegal financial products and services that have stripped millions in wealth from us and our communities. For example, in the lead up to the Great Recession of 2008, black communities were specifically targeted by predatory lenders and tricked into toxic and unsustainable loan products, including subprime loans. Studies have shown that black households were given bad loans even when they qualified for more stable mortgage loans. The economic results of this fraud were nothing less than devastating for black communities all across the country. Foreclosures swept through black communities and black homeowners. Many of them, first-time home buyers, found themselves losing their homes and the wealth that they had accumulated within it. And now, over 10 years later, our families are still struggling to recover and rebuild from this crisis. This is all made worse by the fact that discrimination against black businesses, workers, and prospective homeowners is still not a thing of the past. Black Americans continue to face redlining, unjustified personal and business loan rejections, and are paid less than white counterparts. Due to the projected growth of black minority households in the coming decades and the economic importance of the housing market, some analysts have argued that a failure to address the gap in minority home ownership and the corresponding wealth gap is not only a major civil rights issue, it is a threat to our children's future economic security. We need someone to stand up for us and to provide the access to credit that will allow our families to put a dent in the wealth gap. That's where black-owned banks and black leaders in the business community come in. Black-owned banks are at the forefront of providing safe and sustainable credit to our communities. Black-owned banks are also leading the path in extending other sources of credit to black households, including loans to start a business or to help struggling families cover unexpected expenses. Black-owned banks serve as a safe and sustainable alternative to predatory lenders, such as the many payday and car title lenders that so often establish their businesses in black communities. Unfortunately, the number of black-owned banks has declined drastically over the years, and more continue to shut their doors due to a lack of financial support. Today, there are only about 19 or 20 black-owned banks in the United States. It is of the utmost importance to support these institutions because when black-owned banks close their doors, the community that they serve suffer. I'm happy to report that now that I have the gavel, I hope, and I want to make it a new day. The Committee on Financial Services. Thank you. The Committee on Financial Services is getting back to the business of protecting consumers and ensuring that there are fair opportunities in our financial system. Not only are we exploring new ways to address wealth building and access to credit through our hearings and legislation addressing minority home ownership and wealth building, but we're pushing for much needed diversity in all financial spaces. Our newly created Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee, chaired by my friend, Representative Joyce Beatty of Ohio, is putting businesses and financial institutions to the task of not only hiring more people of color, but also including them in the boardrooms and in major business decision-making. We're looking to open opportunities in the entire industry. Black entrepreneurs are also leading the path to address wealth building in our community. These leaders, including those sitting on this panel that we have today, are not only building their own business empires, but they're also using their power to open doors for those who would come after them. As Black representation in boardrooms continues to needlessly lag, these lenders in business are a true testament to ensuring more representation, more seats at the table for Black Americans. Today, we're going to hear from representatives of our nation's largest Black banks and one of our country's top Black business leaders who can talk to us about more how this is an important issue. So on that note, I'd like to just start to introduce our panel. Let me start with our bank CEOs, who I'd like to have address lending in our communities and how communities can help keep our banks afloat. Let me start with Ms. Cynthia Day. She is the president and CEO of Citizens Bank. She is the first permanently named female CEO in the company's history, with a career that spans over 25 years in the banking and finance industries. Service is at the heart of everything she represents and has been rightfully honored with several leadership and service awards. She's a native of Fayette, Alabama, and a graduate of the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Ms. Day received a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration with a major in accounting. Give her a round of applause. Next, we have Joe Haskins. He's the chairman and president and CEO of Harbor Bank of Maryland, which was recognized by Black Enterprise magazine. Mr. Haskins has received numerous awards and honors, including Entrepreneur of the Year by international accounting firm Ernst & Young. He is currently holding a BA in economics from Morgan State University, an MBA in finance from New York University, a Master of Liberal Arts with a concentration in economics from Johns Hopkins University, and an advanced banking certificate from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. Mr. Haskins. And then there's Mr. Doyle Mitchell. He is the CEO of Industrial Bank, which was also recognized in Black Enterprise magazine 100. He was on the 100th list of 2019. Mr. Mitchell is the third generation president, young people, president of Industrial Bank, which was founded by his grandfather, Jesse H. Mitchell, in 1934. After receiving his bachelor's degree in economics from Rutgers University in 1984, he began a full-time career at Industrial. Mr. Mitchell believes Industrial Bank has remained strong because of its mission to promote the financial and economic empowerment of its diverse communities. Please give a big round of applause. And then, of course, here is my dear friend Terry Williams. She's the president and CEO of One United Bank. She is responsible for the bank's strategic initiatives as well as the day-to-day operations, including all retail branches, marketing, compliance, lending, information technology, customer support, legal, and human resources. Ms. Williams brings 30 years of financial services expertise, including Bank of America and American Express, where she was one of the youngest vice presidents. Ms. Williams holds an MBA with honors from Harvard University and a BA with distinctions in economics from Brown University. And so, I'd like you to give her a big welcome. On the business side, I would like to introduce Ulysses Jr. Bridgman, retired NBA player and entrepreneur who is the CEO of Bridgman Foods, LLC, and Chief Executive Officer of Heartland Coca-Cola Bottling Company, LLC. Mr. Bridgman has successfully owned over 450 restaurants in 20 states. His outstanding work has resulted in various prestigious awards over the years. Mr. Bridgman attended the University of Louisville, where he graduated in 1975 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. Mr. Bridgman played professional basketball with the Milwaukee Bucks and the Los Angeles Clippers. Please give a big round of applause to our entire panel. And so we're going to start this morning by raising a few questions that we would like our panel to just expound and expand on. Ms. Day, I'm going to start with you, President and CEO again of Citizens Bank. I want to know what federal or local policies could be improved to enable black banks to play a larger role in addressing racial discrimination in lending, in expanding access to affordable credit in underserved areas. I want to tell you, this is what we hear most from young would-be entrepreneurs, and even those who have already gotten started in business and wanting to expand and wanting to improve their technology. They say it's very difficult to get access to credit, and they want to know, what do you think about the policies that we as elected officials are involved in, the public policy making? What can we do to help improve and enable black businesses to play a larger role in addressing this racial discrimination in lending, so that our young people who are aspiring to be business persons will have possibilities of access to credit? What are your thoughts?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. That's a really important question, Chairman.
Can you hear her in the back? I think we need to do something with, you may come to the podium if you like,
Okay.
until we make sure that all of the mics are.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to see each of you, and thank you for joining us on this very important topic. And thank you, Chairman and Congressman Water. You are just a true champion and just a wonderful leader of the Financial Services Committee in championing our banks and recognizing and trying to bring to the forefront the things that we do and why it matters. Some of the things I say for our bank, you know, we are steeped in trying to ensure there's 4 tenets inside of our bank that we want to make sure that we are addressing. One is growing and thriving businesses, because we believe that that's the catalyst for jobs. And then we think if you've got growing businesses that you're going to have good educational systems. And if you've got good educational systems, then you're going to have strong families and strong communities. And then it's going to cycle itself back around so that it's a strong ecosystem. And so I think that it's very important to what we do to ensure that we're supporting that ecosystem. Some of the things that I think that's been plaguing us a little bit is the same as we're hearing from our customers, is access to capital. You know, we too are looking for capital so that we can continue to do more of the things that we do, because we understand what these statistics look like. For us, all of our MDIs, you know, 90% of our mortgages are made to people that look like you. And so that's a really big deal. We just need to do more of it. That's in comparison to 1% in a non-minority, non-community bank, only 1%. And so the fact that we're here is extremely important to help increase home ownership and decrease the gap that we're seeing. Legislatively, I think there's a couple of things. The playing field is a little bit unlevel, Congressman Water. We have a lot of fintechs, a lot of banking institutions coming into the market, and they're charging larger amounts of money to distribute the same services that we distribute. But because of the regulatory overhang that they don't have, that we have, it allows them to innovate. And the place that they're going to touch you is on your mobile devices. All of us our community has a high propensity in mobile devices. So they're able to put out all of the content and all of the material to draw you in. But the fact of the matter is that we can provide a lower cost solution. So that's one of the things, if you're spending more money to get the things that you need, it's going to exacerbate this wealth gap. The other thing is, I think that we have to enforce the regulatory, it has to be some parity. I think what we have to, some of the regulatory overhang that we have to deal with, sometimes other banks may not have to deal with the same parity because of lack of understanding and context of our market and of our community. And so I think getting some diversity inside of our regulatory bodies will help them give you context. It may not be that they don't want to understand what we do, it's just that they don't understand. You can't understand if you're not walking in the shoes or in the communities that we have. There are differences, and just getting that context so that when they come inside of our organizations that they understand that our credits may not look the same as in another community. One of the things that we a lot of questions that we got, and I'm sure a lot of other MDI and community banks got, is your delinquencies are a little bit higher. Yes, our delinquencies were a little bit higher, but our loans pay. Our charge-offs are better than other non-minority community banks. That's because we understand. We have context, and we understand how to give credit. We understand how to underwrite that credit. And guess what? Our customers pay. But if we have people questioning that and not understanding that, it makes what we do get a little bit more criticized and a little bit more, looked upon. So just getting some context and diversity inside of that, I think, would be helpful. Now, I could probably go on and on, but those are just a few of the things.
We have some more questions
Okay.
for you. So, here's what I would like to try and do. One of the things I've discovered over the years is I've served on the Financial Services Committee. When I first came on this committee, it was the old banking committee, and I was very new, and I was put on the committee as punishment because I asked for other committees that I wanted to serve on. Everybody was leaving the banking committee because there was a big banking scandal with the savings and loans at that time. And so for those of us that they wanted to punish, they threw us on the banking committee. And this is what I learned. I learned that in the financial services community, they speak another language. And they speak another language because that's the way it has evolved over the years. And oftentimes, when bankers are speaking, you don't always understand exactly what they're saying. But we're going to conduct this town hall meeting today a little bit differently. When anybody says anything you don't understand, I want you to raise your hand. And we're going to tell you who the regulators are and what they do and why they do it. We're going to talk about what is happening with regulation that may not be in the best interest of smaller banks and community banks, as opposed to regulations and rules that are applied to large banks who can cause a lot of trouble and hurt a lot of consumers. So you're going to hear some things today about the FDIC, the OCC, the feds, on and on and on. And I want someone to just stand and say, what is that? What are you talking about? And that's how we're going to learn how to manage our finances, how to support our banks, and how to be in the business of building wealth. Okay? You going to do that? Thank you very much. Let's see who we're going to have here next. You know, I'd like to have Terry Williams come up next. You heard about her background, and I think now of the largest black bank in the country. So let's bring up Ms. Tara Williams. Ms. Williams, I want to ask you about why you think it's important for people to understand who the black banks are, the kind of services that they're offering, the kind of relationship they have with their members of the bank, and what that means in terms of getting to provide these services in ways that makes good sense in our community. So what I'm going to ask her to talk about in short is, what is it black banks know and the way that they operate that serves us in ways nobody else will? Thank you very much, Terry.
Should I talk from here, or I guess not?
I
Can't hear.
don't think that's
working.
So
Okay,
I
not
want you
working.
to come
Okay,
up to the
okay.
podium.
Thank you, first of all, again, Congressman Waters, for inviting us, and good morning to all of you. I'm going to speak in a way that hopefully you'll be able to understand, because I can be very direct. Banking is racist. And that's what black banks know, because we know banking and we know our community. The reality, and I think that it's important for us to understand, because we can have a tendency to blame ourselves for the wealth gap. We have a tendency to think that their ice is colder. And what we need to recognize is that banking has a history of stopping our community from building wealth. What we need to understand is that banks actually allowed slavery to exist for 250 years. Banks, slave owners mortgaged slaves, just like they mortgage homes today. They mortgage slaves. And the mortgages that they got for slaves enabled them to buy more land, to buy more slaves, and to use those slaves to build wealth. Banks actually, and financial institutions actually did target us with predatory lending. The same sort of phenomena happens over and over again. And we see it because we understand banking. We all, these black banks that are here, as well as those of us that aren't, understand the ways in which we could take advantage of customers. We choose not to, because we care about our community. And so I find it difficult when people say, well, why do you need a black bank? Like, if it wasn't for us keeping it honest, if it wasn't for us that could stand here and tell you, black banks are at the forefront of providing services to our community. Cynthia just said something that I think was missed, and I just want to articulate it again directly. The majority of our loans are in black communities and go to black people. Only 1% of the loans of national banks, 1%, we represent 13% of the population, only 1% of their loans go to black people. So, whether it's that they're intentionally racist or the impact of what they're doing is racist, we have to understand that banking has had a systematic impact on stopping us from building wealth. Now, what does that mean, though? What should we do about that? We need to start trusting each other. We need to start practicing collective economics, starting with our families. We have family members that are renting from here, renting from there, and building wealth for other people. We need to pool our money together and buy multifamily property and rent from ourselves. If we own, our communities have become popular again. They went out to the suburbs with loans that they precluded us from engaging in through redlining. And they, quote, stuck us in the inner city. And we're in Boston, Miami, and LA. We're in Liberty City in Miami. We're in South Central and Compton in LA. We're in Dorchester and Roxbury. All of our banks are located in inner city communities. And what we're finding is tremendous gentrification is happening. And so those of us that own homes need to make sure we keep them. If your parents, yes, if your parents own homes, you need to figure out a way. Make sure they have a will. And make sure you keep that property. And then we need to buy in our community. A lot of people in our community want to leave because they've been in these communities and they've seen and they don't see the future. 5 or 10 years from now, our communities are going to be unrecognizable. And that's why we need to bank black, we need to buy black, we need to build black, because the reality is that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. We are the ones. We are all we need, but we do have to support ourselves.
Wow. Okay. And so we're going to move on, and we're going to ask Mr. Haskins to please come forward and share with us some of your thoughts about access to credit in a different way. I think one of the things that was said here this morning was banks, minority banks, black banks also are seeking capital. What does that mean? For many of our young people who have not gotten into the discussion about banking and finance, they don't know where banks get their money from. They just think that you have a well that you dip down into and that you have this money and that you can lend it if you want to. They don't understand that you need capital also. And talk to us about the possibility of investing in black banks.
Great to be here, Congresswoman. Chair. So
Just come with you.
Chairwoman Maxine Waters, Congressman Maxine Waters, advocate for the NBA, National Bankers Association, advocate for minority banks across the country. Thanks for having me before you, an opportunity to speak to this gathering. It is interesting for me to be here because of the role that the Congressional Black Caucus has played in sort of providing information and leadership to our communities. I am just honored to be on this panel. My two previous speakers, my colleagues, Cynthia and Terry, have just sort of set a tone that I think is just wonderful in terms of what's being shared, and hopefully you all are hearing. I think I have the dubious distinction of being the oldest banker here and one of the older ones in the country. I started banking in 1971 at what was known as Chemical Bank, which is now J.P. Morgan Chase. I'm out of Baltimore City, and I want to make an emphasis here. And the reason I started in New York is because the banking system in Baltimore at the time was not ready to have African Americans. And so when we start talking about history, Terry, history is not too far back for me. And so I just think it's important. My banking experience and exposure in New York led me to recognize the importance of capital, access to capital, not only access to capital for businesses, but access to capital for banks. And so taking my knowledge and the information, I said, how can I make a difference in my city my hometown, Baltimore City. And I said the best way to do that is to organize a bank. So I'm one of the founders of Harbor Bank, and I'm pleased to say that we're in our 37th year of operation. And thank you. And we have played a role in helping to revitalize and to lead to the redevelopment of areas of Baltimore City, if you visit, that you wouldn't recognize. Now, I was kidding with the Congresswoman earlier today to say that her president, was in my city last night. And she tried to say it was my president, well, hopefully not for too long. But I didn't tell her that the irony of the place where he spoke was one of the buildings that we helped finance. Oh. Yeah, just to show. So those of you who visit Inner Harbor East, the first money that went into revitalizing that community came out of Harbor Bank. So when you look at Harbor Bank, you'll find that it has been a catalyst and an economic force in revitalizing most of what you see as developmental areas in the city. And I say that because I want to emphasize the importance of the continuation of minority-owned banks and black banks in particular for black communities. We recognize, as you've heard from my colleagues, the important roles that they play and that we have a commitment to the community. And so when the Freddie Gray event occurred in the city, people looked at how they could support the businesses that had been impacted. Well, it was interesting that while funds had been put together, the comment locally was they couldn't find who to give the money to. So we arranged conferences, brought people in, and not only did we provide them with financing from our institution, we connected them to other financing sources. So in many ways, we just don't provide our money, we access money from other sources. Now, Congresswoman Maxine Waters asked me, do we need money in our banks? I would say, short of getting rid of half of these regulations that apply to larger institutions, our next most important role is to have the capital to grow to the next levels. We're often restricted by raising capital, and I can tell you, when organizing Harbor Bank and founding Harbor Bank, it took us 2.5 years to raise the capital to justify. Today, even with the success and the track record that we have, it's still a challenge because, as sort of Terry picked up a little bit, somebody ice is seen as being colder. And yet, you're going to hear from one of my colleagues, third generation, who's proven that we understand managing money and have track records that evidence the fact that we understand managing money. The last thing I'm going to say, Congresswoman, and I'll sit down quickly, is what I recognized early on is that the needs in our community was so great that we created 3 other subsidiaries so we could do more. We created a nonprofit so the loans that the regulators say that we couldn't make didn't mean that they went away, but through our CDC, we found out we could make those loans. The other subsidiary we set up was to take advantage of programs under the Department of Treasury, the CDFI program. And one of the programs in particular that we got involved in early on is known as New Market Tax Credits. And the Congresswoman said, if you don't know it, understand it, we'll make sure you understand it and explain it. it's a tax incentive to private investors to place money in low-income communities. If you visit Baltimore and you look at the area that developed north of Johns Hopkins Hospital called East Baltimore Development, Inc., which is 88 acres, which represents now $2 billion worth of development, Harbor Bank's New Market tax credits that we won, which was over $100 million, we helped leverage building out that community of $2+ billion. So when you look at the science centers there, those science centers, those science buildings happen because of the investments that we were able to bring to the table through our New Markets Tax Credit Program. So not only do we provide money directly, we act as a catalyst for bringing other funds to revitalize our community.
Wow.
But-
Good explanation. You have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you being the oldest banker, and then you having the largest black bank, and not to go too deep, but I dated a COO of a black bank, and what I noticed is that the feds, he was always talking about the feds coming in and auditing, staying days at a time, and it was constant. It was very weird. I was like, do they do this to other large banks? Because literally, almost every other week, the feds were in there on them.
So all banks are regulated. There's no, first of all, can you hear me? Yes, okay. All banks are regulated. And I think, again, Cynthia talked about this. There's a need for context in terms of regulation. And we really appreciate Congressman Waters having the gavel so that she can ensure that there is context provided in the banking industry. It is important for the regulators to understand in the context of our community. Our community has less income. Our community has less home ownership. Our community has businesses, but not as large as the broader community. And because of that, there are a lot of things that we do to, whether it's educate our community in financial literacy, whether it's to help, our community sort of navigate the banking industry, that other institutions don't do. And so, yes, the regulators are in there. They're in every bank. That's not unusual. What is unusual is that they really do not understand our community. And I've given stories of, a regulator coming in and saying, it's the first time I've seen a Mexican. Like literally, that's what a regulator said. It's the first time in my life I've seen a Mexican. Like literally. Or, are we safe here? Like literally. So we, as banks that, are part of our community, but also bankers, get to see both sides. We get to see the wealth of our community. We get to see the success of our community, but we also have to deal with regulators that don't understand our community. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, let me just share some thoughts about that. You're absolutely right that you have these examinations that disrupt the bank. We are particularly concerned about our community banks and our smaller banks. When the examiners come in, oftentimes there are maybe too many of them, and they're asking for records, they're asking for things, and they basically get the employees of the bank all focused on what they want, but they still got to run the bank. And so that's where we come in with public policy and trying to alleviate these kinds of problems of our small banks and community banks in particular. Some of the things we've talked with them about, and some we've even legislated about, is this, and the bankers will have an appreciation for that. Oftentimes we have inexperienced examiners who come into the banks, and the bankers know more about what the examiners say they want to know about than the examiners know. And so they have to spend time educating these examiners who don't have experience and background. We're saying to them, don't send all of your new people to any of our small banks. You send an experienced person with a new person so that they don't disrupt the bank in unnecessary ways. We're also saying that, and taking a look at how often they're coming in. So we're looking at these issues. We're listening to our community banks. We don't want to sit there and allow regulation to undermine the work of our small banks while we're trying to stop the big guys who are basically ripping you off every day. And so that's what we're trying to do, and we'll continue to work on that. Mr. Mitchell, your time now. Please come. Yes, well, let me just say this. First of all, I'd like you again to talk about the importance of understanding the sacrifice that is made by some of those who were in the forefront of founding our banks, like you just heard, and what that means for a second and third generation. And I'd like you to talk about what you learned working at the knee of your parents about banking that helps you to be a good banker and understand our community.
Now, you did say working at the knee and not turned over the knee. Good. Congresswoman, thank you so much. You've been given a lot of accolades, but I have to particularly highlight how much of a fighter you have been for black people against injustice in this country. Thank you for that. I'm going to take a little bit of personal pleasure just to touch on a number of different things. And if it wasn't for you, Congresswoman, we wouldn't have any distinction between the laws and regulations of larger banks versus smaller banks. We could always use more, but I thank you for giving us what we've had. It wasn't easy growing up in a banking environment because banking is a tough business, if you don't know. And having been in banking since I was 16, it's not as fun as it used to be. We used to be able to make loans to people that were on the edges with relative ease. Today, you can't do that. Today, we think about what the regulators are going to say about the actions that we want to take in the future. And that's not how you can run a business with someone looking over your shoulder. And I would just dare say that all the bankers here have done that. What would the regulators think about what I'm about to do? So it's not as fun to actually help people. The way my grandfather made real estate loans, he approved them all. And the way they appraised the value of the property was the broker and he went to the property. They came back after 3 o'clock when the banks closed. You remember those days? Well, some of you all might remember those days. And they put a value on the property. There was no certified licensed appraiser. There was none of that. They decided what the property was worth, and because they knew the market, they were dead on almost 100% of the time. I love the business because of the way that we're able to touch people, the way we are able to change people's lives, literally, every day, the way that we are able to help you improve wealth through, sending a child to college, starting or growing a small business, buying your first home. And for anyone, particularly the young people are here, if you want to build wealth, you have to start on your path to buying a home today through savings. So it wasn't always easy because I was the president's son and everybody didn't want to talk to me because they thought I told my father everything at the dinner table growing up. We didn't even have dinner together, which was the funny thing. And just like many of you in the room here, since I was the president's son, I had to be better. I had to be twice as good as everybody else just to be equal. You know the feeling. because they thought that I was going to be given something. And if they knew my mother, see, everybody talks about my father, but nobody talks about my mother. My mother was the one that was no joke. Now, she was a music teacher, but she was still just as a fighter as anyone. But no, nothing was going to be given to me. It's hard to create a generational business. And I'll say something about that. About 15 years ago, we did a couple of focus groups. And it was all blacks, and one of the questions was, oh, do you like to support businesses? Yes, 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 black businesses, yes, yes, we do. You know, if you knew of a black bank, would you like to support a black bank? Oh, absolutely, yes. And then when they talked about, would you support a generational business? Everybody had a different answer. It's like, well, no, I'm not sure. I don't think so. And the question was asked, well, why? Because we think we're making one family rich. Now, I don't know where anybody thought the DuPonts and families like that, the Marriotts, how they build their wealth. Ford, any of the company and the brands that you already know, I don't know how you think they built their wealth except for generationally. But for our attitudes to stop it, I'm making one family rich, we have to pass, you have to pass your wealth on. Someone mentioned about keep that home. You need to keep that home, because if you have cash money, what are we going to do with it? Spend it. And that house that's paid for by your parents and your grandparents, and everybody, by the nods and the shaking of heads, everybody has one. Had a grandparent or a parent that worked hard, saved their money, paid down their house, and built wealth. I have seen hundreds of people sell that home, and 5 years later, they don't have anything but a bunch of debt and a bunch of stuff. Someone said something about having a will. We have to have an estate plan. And just because you don't have $600 million does not mean you do not have an estate. And we have to plan how to pass on that money. Even sometimes skipping a generation. Because sometimes the Bible says a good man lays up an inheritance for his grandchildren. Now, I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around that, because I'm still trying to educate my children. But we have to think long term. We are the biggest consumer group in America. We just buy and buy and buy and buy. And if you get me on my soapbox, I don't want to hear anybody talk about the $1.3 trillion we have to spend. You know why? Because we only spend 3% of it with black businesses. 3%. That's not even a tithe. In the Jewish community, you've heard it before, but we're not doing anything about it, but you're going to hear it again. In the Jewish community, the dollar recycles 28 days, Asian community, 20 days, Hispanic community, I don't know what it is, but it's a lot longer. For us, it's 6 hours, which means when we get paid at 5 o'clock on Friday, all that money, that $1.3 trillion has left the community by 11 o'clock. And that's data. That's not just conjecture. That's data done by many companies, but Kellogg Business School at that. Here's the thing. If we just spend 10% of our money, just 10, just the tithe, not 50, although we should, we would employ 1 million black people, new black people, overnight. That's a whole lot of people off the streets of Baltimore, Atlanta, Boston, D.C., with meaningful jobs by trustworthy people. So I know I didn't talk about banking any, but I just sometimes I just can't help myself. So in closing, I just want to say this. It's good to do business with a black bank and a black business, but bring us your best. Bring us your best. When Killer Mike started the movement of banking black, we got 5,000 new accounts, $20 million in deposits. Great. But a lot of those deposits were $100, $150. I lose money on that. So you can bank black me right out of business. I want the right business. Someone talked about us doing all of our, most of our lending in low and moderate income areas, lending to blacks. That's fine. And we will all want to keep doing that. But if I don't get some good, easy business, it's even harder for me to try to make the tougher loans that we do every day. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, sir, in the back.
Expound on what you mean by the good business versus bad business.
Every day, we get some good customers, and we get a lot of customers that we have to really work with. People that have 580 scores. We're the black people that have 720 scores. I don't have to work so hard on them. I don't have to take the criticism from the regulators when I make those loans. Now, we do some loans at 580 because we understand our customers. We get behind the story. We see what happened in your life, and we see what your plan is. And if I look in the eye, I can say, this is an honest person. I will do this loan. And we've done those loans, and it's worked. There's no different default rate for us for loans under 640 than there is for loans over 640. But see, a lot of us that have 720 scores like to walk into Chase and Bank of America and Wells Fargo and feel like.
That's right. That's right. Okay, before I call on Mr. Bridgman, I want to wrap up the discussion with the banks, and we can get back to questions after we complete his presentation. But I want to wrap this up this way. Bankers, I want you to give me a loan. Yeah, I got bad credit. No, I don't have any savings. Well, I can't always pay my bills, so yeah, I'm behind in my bills. But you a black bank, you're supposed to give me a loan. I'm a black person. That's what you do. You black bank give black people loans? What's all this other stuff you asking me about my business? It ain't none of your business whether or not. Just give me some money. All right, bankers, what do we need to do to get our house in order so that we can qualify for a loan and stop asking you to just give me a loan in spite of? Come help me out.
Since I'm on a roll.
Come to the mic. Come to the mic.
And I won't be long. But we don't give you anything. Okay? We're for-profit institutions. What we do not like to say no. We'll say not yet. We'll say not yet. And hopefully when you do some of the things that we suggest to you, you'll come back. What happens too often is we suggest things for you to do, you do them, and then you don't ever come back. Why treat me like that? The things that we ask for, every other bank is supposed to ask for. But I'll give you one little secret, and I know this because I've had bankers at other banks tell me. I've had banks to make a loan to someone I turned down just to spite me. Just so they could say, and this is literally this was a senior vice president. This wasn't a teller telling me this. This is what he told the customer. I told you you shouldn't be over there. Now that's fact and that's truth. Everybody's supposed to collect the same things. But if I am a $1 trillion institution, the regulators will never see that. They don't have the capacity to check every little loan that's made by the large banks so they can cut corners. Now, that could work to your advantage because you might want the money. Problem is a lot of large institutions aren't going to tell you what you're getting into. So when they make it easy for you to get a loan, you didn't know that you paid 1% more or 2 points more than you should have. You just wanted the money, you got the money, and you ran off, and then 5 years later your payment changed, and you were like, I didn't know my payment was going to change. So you need to deal with somebody that you really trust.
Thank you very much. And I want to share with you that we understand that the credit bureaus have not been our friend. And I know that there are a lot of folks who have been deemed to be poor credit risk simply because they messed up at the credit bureau. They mixed up some names, somebody stole your credit, on and on and on. Things happen. And when they give us our credit scores, we don't fight. We don't call. We don't challenge. We don't bring more information. We, as public policymakers, are creating comprehensive legislation to straighten out our credit bureaus. They have a monopoly on our credit information. And this is a problem that we have. One of the things we're going to do as public policymakers is to work with bringing them, making them do a better job of what they do because they have this monopoly. And I'm looking at some other things that I probably should not talk about now in terms of who owns your information. Big data and what they're doing with it. And so we're going to be working on these issues, but I promise you we're going to have some movement on the credit bureaus. We have worked almost 2 years compiling the information about who they are, what they do, how they handle your credit, et cetera, et cetera. Now, having said all of that, wrapping it up on this, on this front, the millennials are saying, bankers, I just got out of college, and I owe all this money back that I borrowed to get an education. I didn't know it was going to cost me this much, but the loans were made available. I know I've got to pay the money back. Now I can't buy a house, I can't buy a car, I can't get married, I can't have children. What should I do? What can I do about the fact that I'm in this situation, and I'm probably also in a situation where the wages do not match the cost of living? How can you help me? Is there a special product for millennials? You have any advice for us? What's your advice? Any advice for us? Don't tell me to get another job. I'm in the gig market already. I'm working 2 jobs.
It's a tough one. So first of all, I think we all have to understand that student debt is a big problem today. There's $1.5 trillion in student debt. Average student debt is about $30,000, which is a lot for someone to pay, given when they get out of school, they might be making $30,000. Before we get to what do you do if you have student debt, I want to help us all try to be very careful today about incurring student debt. When I got out of school, when I got out of high school, going into college, if you got into college, you went. You went to the best college you got into. When I went to Brown, the tuition was $7,000. When I got out of Brown, I made $15,000 a year. So twice what the tuition was. Today, the tuition for Brown is $70,000. When kids get out of Brown today, they are not making $150,000. In other words, twice what their tuition is. The reality is college does not pay, the investment in college does not pay as much as it paid when we the baby boomers got out of college. Got out of high school or went to college. So we need to be very careful with our kids and our grandkids and educating them to avoid student debt as much as possible. That could mean going to community college for a couple of years and then transferring to a 4-year college. That could mean going to an HBCU, which is less expensive, and by the way, because my daughter went to Spelman, provides a great education. So I think that we all need to really look at student debt very differently, and this is a generational change that we need to get used to. Look at student debt very differently than we did in a previous generation. If you are, though, out of college and you have incurred this student debt, there are ways that you should negotiate with your lender to gear your payments towards your income. There are income-based plans that you should ask for. But I want to caution you to be very careful not to avoid deferring your debt too much. That's one of the things that we like to do is defer, defer, defer. Well, I can tell you that the interest is accumulating on that debt, and you'll end up owing significantly more than what you borrowed. So you need to come up, you can work on an income-based plan with your lender, but I will also tell you that that student debt will not go away, especially if it's government guaranteed. They will come after you for the rest of your life. I have someone who works for me who is 60 years old, and they actually took money out of her bank account to pay her student loans. She's 60. So it's not something that you can avoid, but it is something that you can manage by getting it to be an income-based plan. And I will also tell you that as lenders, we do look at what you're paying. If you come up with that plan will be what we include in your debt-to-income ratios. If you're looking to buy a home, we will actually include what you're paying if you have an income-based plan, as opposed to what the student loan agreement was from the very beginning. So it is a problem. Try to avoid as much student debt as possible, but we do have to incur it in order to go to school a lot of times, and you just have to manage it, but try to avoid deferring it for too long. Thank you.
Great advice. Great advice. And so we have with us this morning a gentleman who is a success story, someone who is a great businessman, who understands investments, who's done very well, who has built wealth, and that's what we're talking about. And I have him here this morning for a special reason. You know the talk that goes on in our community about athletes and money. They make all that money and they don't give us any. They make all that money and they won't come and put it back in our communities. So when we look at the money that athletes and entertainers make because of their talent, they deserve every penny that they're making, and they should have access to a good life and all that money brings. How did he do it? Why did he do it? Why did he invest? How did he become part of the ownership, maybe in some, the management of some? Why didn't he just take that money that he made in the NBA and go on about his business and live a good life? I'm asking these questions. I don't know the answers to them, but he's here. Let him tell us. Thank you very much.
Tough question. No, and thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here. And Congresswoman doesn't remember, but a long time ago, well, let me go back. Ed over here is her son. I don't know if a lot of you know Ed, but I've known him a long time, and we were having dinner in L.A. when I was in L.A., and that's when I first ran into you. So we were just nobody then, so she won't remember. But the first thing I would say is not getting into wealth or anything like that, but I was on a bank board for 10 years, and everything that they told you is absolutely correct. And take it to heart, because what they're telling you is to try and help you. And the thing, if you didn't understand something, what I would tell you to do is to go find books on finance for dummies, anything like that, to educate yourself, because the banking business is a tough business and it can be complicated, but it's something that affects everyone's life. And the more knowledge you have on it, the better you will be. Now, talking about myself, well, I'm one of those athletes that played a long time ago, so don't put me in the category of what LeBron's making and some of these other guys are making. When I came into the NBA a number of years ago, to give you an example and to tell you the truth, the total salary for all 12 players and the 3 coaches was $1.8 million. Yeah, that's what I thought too. So when I played, we knew that at the end of your career, however long that career was, that you were going to have to get a job. And so when we played in the summertime, I went to law school in the summertime. I worked at Howard Johnson's in the summertime for 2 years. I worked for an insurance consulting company for a couple of years, trying to figure out what is it you're going to do, because you know that you're going to have a job. You were not going to have the type of money that allowed you to just enjoy life. And so a couple of years before my career was over with, I met a banker who, and a couple of his clients were in the restaurant business, fast food business. They were in the Popeyes chicken business. And so he said, they're getting involved with Wendy's. You need to talk to them. They can get you involved and you can make some money with them. So when you stop playing, you won't have to take the first job. So that's what I did. I met them, and we opened a restaurant in Chicago, Wendy's restaurant on 35th, 53rd and Hyde Park. And long story short, they weren't the most honest people in the world, but that's a whole nother story. I had to figure out, so Wendy's got involved, got out of that restaurant, and they said, well, why don't you, if you want to be in the restaurant business, why don't you get involved in Milwaukee? You spent all that time there in the city. So that's what I did. So they sold me 5 restaurants. Where were they located at? In the inner city, because that's where they want to shepherd everybody to. Were they good restaurants? Absolutely not. 3 were only doing $600,000 a year. 1 was doing $400,000 a year, and 1 was only doing $800,000 a year. Could you make any money? Not very much, and I forgot that in Milwaukee it snows a whole lot in the wintertime and it gets cold, and when it snows 2 feet, people don't come eat. So we didn't have sales. So I had to learn how to run a restaurant like a lot of people learn how to manage their homes with not a lot of money. And how did you make that successful? I did everything in the restaurant, spent a lot of time in the restaurants, sometimes 12, 18 hours, and today all those restaurants average close to $2 million a year. Well, I mean, it's a lot of people that did that, but what I will tell you, I had banked at a bank all the time I was playing basketball in Milwaukee. We had got our loan for our home there and had money in the bank. And we had 5 restaurants, and I went to this banker that I had known for all these years and asked for a loan. And I will tell you that when I went to ask for the loan, I went with the other person that was working for me, who was a different color than me. And when we sat down to talk about the business, he didn't ask me any questions. All his questions were directed to the other person that didn't own the business. And so I sat there and I just said, little interesting here. So he said, well, why do you want a loan? And I said, well, I think we're going to need one. Oh, well, okay, don't give us a loan. How about a line of credit? What do you want a line of credit for? Well, you know, things come up like wintertime and things like that, and we might have to access it. Well, then he started asking him about the business. We went through this whole thing for a whole week, and he said, no, turn me down. And so I finally found someone to give us a loan. And ironically, the next year, Wendy's came back and said, well, since you've got the 5 stores, why don't you buy the rest of the market? It's not that good anyway. So we bought the rest of the market from them, and we went from 5 to 21 stores. And then a couple years later, we went to 28 stores. And then a year or so later, we went to 50-something. Then after a while, we were at 150 stores. And then we were at 200 stores. And then other people came to you and they said, well, since you like this restaurant business, why don't you do our brand? So we did this brand and we did that brand and we added this stores and we built some. We moved to this city and that city. And then a few years later, we're at not 450, we're at 500 restaurants. And we employ 20-some thousand people all around. And I saw the banker again. And he said, well, why don't you come talk to me? And obviously, I did not go back and talk to him. But what I will tell you, it was never about making money. If it had been about making money for me, I would have done something totally different. But what it was about was allowing people to better their lives. And as we built stores, people went from general manager to district manager and then to area manager, and they were making 6 figures, over $100,000 a year in the restaurant business, which gets some bad rap. But as more people started to better their life, we did better as a company. And when I turned around, I said, wow, how did we get all these restaurants? And it was about the people. It was never about me. And so as the story continues, we did a good job. We were a Coca-Cola customer, and they came to us a few years ago and said, what do you think about becoming a Coca-Cola bottler? And so I said, okay, I'll think about that. And so we became 3 years ago a Coca-Cola bottler distributor in the Midwest, and we're the 3rd new bottler that they've added in the last 40 years. Yeah. And over the life of Coca-Cola, which is 130, 40 years, they've had 3 African-American bottlers in all of that time. Now, that doesn't mean don't go out there and stop drinking Coca-Cola or whatever. But, you know, it was about a dream. What was your dream? I think back, and I'll go back to when I was playing basketball. I was on the collective bargaining committee, and so what's that mean? That means we're arguing with the owners over how much per diem we get, all these kind of things. So we're sitting around a big round table, and owners are on the other side, we're on this side, all these attorneys are around, and we're saying, we need more money for per diem, we need this, we need that. And the owners are sitting there like they could care less. And so we take a break, and they go over to their side of the room, and we're on our side of the room, and I kind of ease over to kind of hear what they're talking about, and they're talking about business. True story. One of the owners was saying, you need to get involved with me. I've got this 450 apartment unit going up in Kansas City. The other owner said, hey, I've got this new movie that I'm producing that's coming out. It's called The Sting. True story. You guys need to get involved with me on this. I think it's going to be good. They're just talking about business deals. And now they're all excited, and they're smiling, and they're happy. Break-ins, we go back to collective bargaining, and they go back to, oh, geez, I got to listen to all this stuff again. So I said, what am I missing here? To me, basketball was the most important thing, I thought. But I learned then that no, the business of basketball is the most important thing. This is what they got excited about, business. Basketball just happened to be one of the things that they did. So I said, I want to understand this feeling that they have. So when I stopped playing, I had the opportunity to stay in basketball. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go try something else. I'm going to go try business. So that's when I went and got involved in the restaurant business. I will tell you the truth. Played 12 years. When I retired, I had saved $900,000. When I bought the restaurants, how much did it cost? $900,000. And I tell you that only to say that if they were not successful, I would have been another statistic that you hear, another athlete that played that's now bankrupt. Right. So it's not really, and all I'm saying, it's not about, an owner told me, it's not about how much you make, it's about what you do with it. And that's a true story, although he was telling me that not to pay me any more money, but it is a true story. So in wrapping up, I will just say that I've been fortunate. It's never been about me. It's never been about making money. And right now it's about passing all this along to my kids. Last thing I'll say, my kids aren't kids. They're all grown. But they only, few rules. One, if you went out for a sports team, you couldn't quit, which they didn't. But secondly, they had to go to college. They had, and undergrad, and then they had to get an advanced degree. And they all went and got MBAs. And then they had to go do something else. And then they made a decision to come and get involved in the business on their own. So now they're involved in the business. I'm not really running any of the restaurants. I'm involved with the soda side. Two of them are running the restaurant business. One's with me on the Coca-Cola side. But it's about, and they talk about, how do we continue with this? How do we grow this? How do we build a legacy? And that's something that I never thought about when I was growing up. And athletes don't really, and well, I won't say they don't think about it, but I think it's better today when I see athletes getting involved in other things, see LeBron doing production, all those things like that. But what I don't see is athletes coming together to pool their resources to really make a difference. And I've gone to some of them and I said, well, why don't you think about getting involved in this or that? And it's always an agent or somebody advising them that says, well, no, you know, you need to do this. Let me take care of it. And we still, unfortunately, have that mentality that the word from the other person is better than what we can do. So we've got to get by all of that. We've got to get, because athletes, they can pull their resources. I mean, we wouldn't just be putting programs on ESPN or whatever. We'd own BET again. We'd own this, we'd own that. We own all kind of things. So I'm going to stop because I could start preaching too. So okay. Thank you. Okay.
Great information. And so we're going to take some questions now. And I thank the panel so very much for their presence here today, for their presentation. Before we take the questions, let's give them all a big round of applause. Big round of applause. Thank you. And so as we have those of you who would like to have a question answered or have a thought that you can do in a minute, we'd like you to come to the microphone and address your question to one of our panelists or all of our panelists.
Well, first, I want to thank Congressman Waters for your bold and courageous leadership. I live in the South Central LA, and you are the baddest sister on the planet, so we thank you, Congressman Waters. So, real briefly, Junior Bridgman, I used to babysit your son, you know, 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
And I'll just say this real quickly. You're a great business person, great basketball player, but you're a better human being, because when I was homeless youth in South Central LA, you and your wife Doris took me in, and I pretty much, you know, stayed with you whenever I wanted to. And the best Christmas I ever had with my wife was when I woke up Christmas morning and exchanged Christmas gifts with you and your family. So you were always like my role model, you. And I'd be remiss because my other role model, and I'm being really honest right now, I'm not saying this to impress anybody, my other role model was Ed Waters, right against that wall. You and Ed Waters were my role models. So I want to thank you. So my question to you, Junior, is what inspired you, who were your role models to be a successful business person? Thank you.
Good question.
Good question. Well, I think first was my father, who worked in the steel mills, so and told me that this is not what you want to do your whole life. So if you don't get education, I've got a spot right here next to me. So that was the first thing. And then secondly, I was fortunate enough to grow up in the era with John Johnson, you know, with people like him, with Reginald Lewis, and so I read all their books, and then I read books by Ted Turner, all those guys, and I said, wait a minute, they're doing the same things. What makes me well, I'm no different than them. Why can I not do the same thing? So it's a lot of people like that. And the last person, I know you hear a lot about owners, but Jim Fitzgerald, that was the owner of the Bucks, was a great man. And one quick story, we were having breakfast and we were playing Golden State tonight. We were having breakfast at the Hyatt in Oakland. And he said, what are you going to do when you stop playing? And I said, well, I'd like to get involved in business. He said, what kind of business? I said, business. And that's just what he did. He laughed and he said, remember this, if you get involved in business, you're only going to have two problems. And I leaned forward to hear what he was going to say, and he said, one, people, and the second, money. And you know what? That's been true for all these years. So, but that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, go right ahead.
And grace and peace, everyone. My name is Leslie Redmond. I'm 27 years old from the inner city of Washington, D.C., born and raised. I went on to become a first-generation college graduate, recently graduated with my JD MBA from the University of St. Thomas, and I'm the president. Thank you all. And I'm the president for the Minneapolis NAACP. And so I really enjoyed this panel. Thank you all for being here today. I wanted to know, do you all have any collaborations with the NAACP? Do you have any engagement? Because I think about, I was the president for our Black Law Student Association. There's so many students who could be great potential customers of yours. And so I just want to know about that engagement and collaboration that you may have with NAACP or just universities.
So, we're very active with the NAACP, particularly the Boston chapter, because it's at least the first chapter, and the NAACP will be coming to Boston next year for the national conference. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the NAACP. I mean, the reality is that even though we're bankers, we are actually social justice advocates, and recognize that discrimination is what has held us back, and it's organizations like the NAACP that's at the forefront of that fight.
Thank you.
We are, you know, the headquarters of NAACP is in Baltimore. Another plus for Baltimore, by the way. And so we have done financing for the headquarters since its original relocation. And the previous two heads of the NAACP, we actually bank at Harbor Bank. So, so we.
I just wanted to add one last thought about that. We are affiliated with our chapter in Atlanta as well. But I think we should kind of go globally and think about this on a global scale. And I appreciate Congressman Water, who is introducing and expanding the conversation. So it's not just the NAACP, it's the Congressional Caucus, it's NARAD. I could go on and on and on. And I think collectively we need to do a better job of having a conversation so that our money doesn't turn every 6 hours. Right. Every ethnic group is very good at this, and I don't know why it's so hard for us to do this. In the movement of Black rabbi, a Jewish rabbi said this, and I really kind of took this to heart, and I think it's something that we should all, because we're all responsible for the wealth gap. I mean, we bear some responsibility. Congressman Waters bears some responsibility, congressional bodies, but all of you bear some responsibility as well. We've got to support each other. And what he said was this: organized people with organized money creates power. Yes. And so we all have a responsibility. We have a responsibility, and we are boots on the ground, but each of you have a responsibility to collectively make a difference, and that's what's going to really change. So it's more than just about the NAACP. It's about all of us collaborating and having the conversation, and I believe that we can. push the agenda forward and change the narrative that we're discussing here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Organized people with organized money creates power. And I'm going to translate that to wealth.
Thank you. Go right ahead with your question.
Good morning. Good morning.
Speak up, please. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Barry Clark.
Speak right into the microphone.
Hello. Hello.
Maybe you can take it off the stand.
Hello.
There you go.
It's a little.
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. Hi, my name's Barry Clark. I'm a Oxon Hill, Maryland native. I've been in LA for 9 years. I've been in the compliant cannabis industry for 6 years. And I was just curious on the topic of unifying money and everything like that. What are you guys doing in the cannabis space to help make sure we have generational wealth and have a foot in the door? Just curious as far as like banking, because I see it a lot in California where, you know, you'll have Jewish families or whatever have you, somehow with the head of a bank, find a way to give loans to their, you know, community. So I'm just curious. I have a lot of questions for y'all, but that's the only question I have right now.
It's a sticky situation.
I know it is.
It's a sticky situation. Very few banks have gotten into being able to.
Speak up so the people can hear you all
I'm
the
trying
way.
to. I think it's really the mic. It's a sticky situation. Only a few banks have gotten into it.
Yeah.
And you know what? We have had people approach us. I'm sure you all have as well. And I just dare say, as a black-owned small bank, we would not get liberties in that area.
Understood.
We would not, and it's just something that is too risky for us as black banks to try to talk about.
But is there a capital investment firm that you guys are aware of that's able to have that private relationship, maybe building a company, something of that nature? If we were federally legal,
What's wrong with this
we will be
microphone?
so far behind to the point where we just be failing at that point.
You didn't turn it.
And I'm just curious if, because I know there's so many dark spaces and it's just like, it's a scary topic because of many reasons, but I'm just curious as to how can we unify the black capital with the banking industry to create some kind of business on the side that would be able to help fund legitimate cannabis compliant businesses that can actually help create generational wealth.
Again, that's just an industry that, you know, we do a lot of things as banks. I've heard of a bank in Connecticut. I can't remember the name. There's one here locally that actually will bank cannabis businesses.
Let me add a little bit of something to that because I just passed out of our committee a few weeks ago the cannabis banking bill because what was happening is states were coming up with laws to allow medical marijuana and cannabis operations, but and this is all cash. And so Colorado, for example, one of the leaders in this, they were just, realizing huge sums of cash, and it was starting to create a criminal problem where they were getting robbed. Someone even got killed, I believe, in a robbery in Colorado. And so the banks, are working under the bank secrecy laws, and they have to be careful, or they will get in a lot of trouble. And so we had to pass laws, and that law is coming to the floor of the House of Representatives, and between the Senate and the House, we will be able to have a safe harbor for banks who are doing business with cannabis businesses now.